Hello and welcome to Biblical Breadcrumbs, where today we have Daniel chapter 7 to deal with, so if you're interested in that, you should probably turn over to that. Again, like last time, this is a class that I'm going to teach, and classes are a little bit more difficult to just sit down and kind of present. So I have vague sermon notes here that I'm going to go over. And it's just 2 pages of sermon notes because the majority of a class such as Daniel 7 and going forward will probably be in commentary back and forth about people who are presuming things and stating their opinions about stuff. And I hopefully nicely push back on that because there are questions. What I'm going to do today is kind of preach through this like I would preach through it if it was a sermon, and otherwise make some other commentary and put some notes in there, because there are a lot of times people insist on some things that shouldn't be insisted on. Well, there's a whole conversation about even whatever should be insisted on, but we'll just go ahead and we'll do Daniel chapter 7. We'll just keep it there, and as things come up, then we can address those as they do. All right. Daniel 7. Again, I'm going to end up reading the whole chapter straight up like I did last time, and then I'll just talk about the whole chapter. In class, I will read, 3 verses at a time, or whatever it ends up being, however it ends up working out. A little section, and then comment on the section, and give people a chance to ask questions and stuff. That doesn't work for this, and so for this format, we'll pretend that this is just a sermon and go to it. To which the sermon begins with a fantastic line. If you're looking at the notes that I have, you're welcome. It starts with a great intro. Women are confusing. True. Amen. What can I say? That doesn't mean you don't try to understand them, right? Because that's just how it goes, right? Women are confusing, but if you just ignore them, then you miss out on a lot of good things in life. Well, okay. Don't just avoid the things that you don't understand. Sometimes there is a time and place to actually grapple with and try to understand the fundamentally understandable. Daniel 7, and really the second half of the book of Daniel as a whole, falls into this category of, do I know what's happening? Not really, but I would like to try and figure it out. Daniel 7 falls into, I wish I understood, but I don't really get it. And if you can say that about Daniel 7, you can say that about Daniel 8, you can definitely say that about Daniel 9, and even a lot of people hit it with chapters 10, 11, and parts of 12. The second half of Daniel, first half of Daniel is, the first 6 chapters of Daniel are stories. Stories are easy to understand, stories are easy to tell. They're told to kids, they're taught very popularly in Bible class. You have the fiery furnace in Daniel chapter 3, you have the lion's den in Daniel chapter 6. These are stories where if you're raised in the church or if you're raised in a religious environment, you're probably familiar with those stories from before the time you have memories. You get told those things. Daniel 7 doesn't make it into that list, generally. Daniel 7, you have a lion thing with wings, but it gets its wings ripped off, and then it stands up like a human being, and it's given a human brain. What does that mean, right? Daniel 7 starts to be very imaginative. In the technical circles, we would call this the apocalyptic genre being introduced. Apocalyptic being essentially an exploration of good and evil in a very hyper-realistic and very kind of fragmentary, thoughtful picture word kind of things. If you want to understand apocalyptic, go read Revelation, right? How much of that is hyper-literal versus being representative of the forces of good fighting the forces of evil, and the forces of good end up winning? Go read Ezekiel chapter 1. Does God literally, does the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord literally look like a glowing human being sitting on a bright blue throne that's on top of a sea of glass, that's on top of 4 beings with 4 faces each, or maybe it's 4 heads each, that all have wheels that have eyes on them and they roll all around the place? Is that literal? Probably not, right? It's representing something, but maybe you need to take a few steps before you can say exactly what it's representing. It's very easy to say good versus evil and to kind of go from there, right? Here's the broad picture, but as you zoom in on details, especially in apocalyptic literature, it gets very complicated, and you need to be very careful about what you insist on. So, with all that in mind, it's not, right, just because it's confusing doesn't mean you should write it off. But it does mean you should be very careful. And so we'll start by reading Daniel chapter 7. It is the first of Daniel's visions, and it is, as the notes say, it is certainly something. The Daniel commentary that I've used to assemble most of the series describes Daniel 7 as a minefield, which is, it's encouraging and it's empowering when you get through it, as long as you don't take a wrong step along the way. So, Daniel 7. Let's start reading in verse 1. I'm reading New American Standard 2020 update. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions in his mind as he lay on his bed. Then he wrote the dream down and told the following summary of it. Daniel said, I was looking in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea, and four great beasts were coming up from the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion, but had the wings of an eagle. I kept looking until the wings were plucked, and it was lifted up from the ground and set on 2 feet like a man, and a human mind was also given to it. And behold, another beast, a second one resembling a bear, and it was raised up on one side, and 3 ribs were in its mouth between its teeth. And they said to it, Arise, devour much meat. After this I kept looking, and behold, another one like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. And the beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, the 4th beast, dreadful and terrible and extremely strong, and it had large iron teeth. It devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with its feet. And it was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. While I was thinking about the horns, behold, another horn, a little one, came up among them, and 3 of the previous horns were plucked out before it. And behold, this horn possessed eyes like human eyes, and a mouth uttering great boasts. I kept looking until thrones were set up, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was ablaze with flames, its wheels were a burning fire. A river of fire was flowing and coming out from before him. Thousands of thousands upon thousands were serving him, and myriads upon myriads were standing before him. The court convened, and the books were opened. Then I kept looking because of the sound of the boastful words which the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was killed, and its body was destroyed and given to the burning fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but an extension of life was granted to them for an appointed period of time. I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, one like a son of man was coming. And he came up to the Ancient of Days, and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion, honor, and a kingdom, so that all the peoples, nations, and populations of all languages might serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which will not pass away, and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed. As for me, Daniel, my spirit was distressed within me, and the visions in my mind kept alarming me. I approached one of those who were standing by, and began requesting of him the exact meaning of all this. So he told me, and made known to me the interpretation of these things. These great beasts, which are 4 in number, are 4 kings which will arise from the earth. But the saints of the highest one will receive the kingdom, and take possession of the kingdom forever, for all ages to come. Then I desired to know the exact meaning of the 4th beast, which was different from all the others, exceedingly dreadful, with its teeth of iron and its claws of bronze, and which devoured, crushed, and trampled down the remainder with its feet, and the meaning of the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn which came up, and before which 3 of the horns fell, namely, that horn which had eyes and a mouth uttering great boasts, and which was larger in appearance than its associates. I kept looking, and that horn was waging war with the saints and prevailing against them, until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was passed in favor of the saints of the highest one, and the time arrived when the saints took possession of the kingdom. This is what he said. The 4th beast will be a 4th kingdom on the earth, which will be different from all the other kingdoms, and will devour the whole earth and trample it down and crush it. As for the 10 horns, out of his kingdom 10 kings will arise, and another will arise after them, and he will be different from the previous ones, and he will humble 3 kings. And he will speak against the Most High, and wear down the saints of the Highest One, and he will intend to make alterations in times and in law, and they will be handed over to him for a time, times, and half a time. But the court will convene for judgment, and his dominion will be taken away, annihilated, and destroyed forever. Then the sovereignty, the dominion, and the greatness of all the kingdoms under the whole heaven will be given to the to the people of the saints of the Highest One. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all the empires will serve and obey him. At this point, the revelation ended. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts were greatly alarming me, and my face became pale, but I kept the matter to myself. So, what you have here is, also thanks to the commentary I mentioned last time, Dale Ralph Davis on the book of Daniel, what you have here are 3 different pictures, 3 different little notes that you should take in mind, 3 different sections to this chapter, and if I was preaching it as a sermon, hopefully you realize how difficult that kind of sermon would be, but if you're preaching it as a sermon, there are 3 basic breakdowns that go into this chapter. Number 1, you have verses 1 through 8 telling you all about the history that's happening. Number 2, you have verses 9 through 14 telling you about the reality of what's going on in heaven while history is happening. Heaven has its own its own playbook. And in verses 15 through 28, you have the explanation of how we get there. Right? Tracking through history, wanting an explanation. Daniel asks for an explanation, and honestly, he doesn't really get one. And that's one of the most important points to think about as this chapter goes. How much of this is really explained to Daniel? How much of this can we really nail down with the absolute certainty? A lot of people, when they come to Daniel 7 or 8 or 9, want to pin down some of these details, and they want to look at them and figure out exactly what's being spoken of. For example, right, we'll jump ahead quite a bit. We'll yawn, and then we'll notice the whole second section, the whole last half of the chapter. Daniel wants to know the explanation of the 4th beast. Oh, well, it's a kingdom, just like the other kingdoms, but not like the other kingdoms. Okay. In what way is it a kingdom just like the other kingdoms, but not like the other kingdoms? We don't know, right? We're not actually told that. Now, a lot of people will come up with an idea as to how it's a different kingdom. They will firstly assume the identity of the kingdom. Most commonly, that 4th kingdom is assumed to be Rome, and if I were to have to pick a side, I would also assume that kingdom was Rome, but the book doesn't say it. And so you have to be careful with how you group those together. You have a 4th kingdom. We don't actually, Daniel never hears what kingdom it is. When you turn to chapter 8, there are 2 beasts that fight each other, and those are both identified. Those are clearly identified as Medo-Persia and Greece. God makes sure to name those specifically. Here he doesn't. And so it's left, it's not left to our imagination, right? That is the wrong way to say it. But it is left to us to figure out. It's left to us without specification, where we are able to think on it and maybe figure something out. But even that is like, well, we're guessing on it. We don't even know. God may have not wanted us to figure it out. Maybe that's why he left the names out. Or maybe God left the names out because he wants us to figure it out, but he doesn't want to just hand it to us for free. Maybe he left the names out because, I have no idea, right? It's not my job to whittle on God's end of the stick. All I know is he never says what beast 1, 2, 3, or 4 are. We can make some pretty good guesses, especially when you get to chapter 8 and read some of that. If you read some of that back on chapter 7, if you think that's a legitimate way to read chapter 8 and then how it informs chapter 7, or how it could possibly inform chapter 7, if you think that's a legitimate idea, then sure, maybe, right? Maybe you can read it on that. But even then, it's like, do you understand how chaotic this is? If you assume that reading chapter 8 retroactively informs you on chapter 7, then you can make some pretty solid guesses on the monsters in chapter 7. If you don't think that, then you can't, at least not on Chapter 8. Although you can make some decisions based on Chapter 7, but they are primarily suppositional and are very much shored up when you get to Chapter 8 and see those things repeated. So, again, it's very messy. All this to say, be careful what you try and force. There are some things that we know for sure, and it is important to stick with what we know for sure. And if we are going to guess on anything, it's important to specifically label that we are guessing and we do not actually know. Don't miss the forest for the trees. There's a great big picture here that's really important and that you need to understand, even if you don't get all the details. And sometimes it helps when you skim over some of the details to get the overall picture instead of worrying about every last minutia and trying to come up with an answer for every last little toenail on the beast. Keep in mind, there is a lot of figurative imagery here. We've already covered this. Even just saying, there are beasts in here. It's really about kingdoms. There are kingdoms in here, but God decides to describe them as ravenous beasts, or at least some of them as ravenous beasts. Like, it's figurative, right? It's fundamentally figurative in its imagery, so don't be surprised when I say, I don't have an answer for all of these figures of speech. Maybe I can't line everything up, although I certainly try. There are 4 beasts in history, and if you want to look at verse 17, of course, that corroborates that story. These great beasts, which are 4 in number, are 4 kings. By the way, they are kings, not kingdoms, which is an interesting way to say it. Because if you look at it like that, verse 17, these are 4 kings. Well, Daniel is very curious about this 4th king in verse 19. He asks about the 4th beast, and the angel's answer in verse 23 is, the 4th beast will be a 4th kingdom. Well, which one is it? Is the beast a king or a kingdom? And the answer is, yeah, right? Because it's figurative. It's representative of something that's happening. It's representative of a reality, but it's not so specific. It is not only one king, nor is it just one kingdom. It's kind of an amalgamation of both, right? He says king. King is representative. So much of this is wrapped up in the figures of speech. You need to be careful with it. So you see 4 great beasts in the beginning. They rise out of the sea. Daniel is having a dream. First year of King Belshazzar, so this puts us back right before chapter 5 happens. Belshazzar has a complicated ascendancy where he's only solo king for like a very short amount of time, but he is a co-regent for quite a while, and I don't know how many years that was. This is the first year that Belshazzar comes into power, so it's somewhere between chapters 4 and 5 of Daniel is when this is chronologically happening. Daniel is on his bed, he sees this dream, and he writes it down. He writes down in verse 1, he tells the following summary of it. This stuff that Daniel saw, that he repeats in chapter 7, is a summary of what he saw. It is not a complete picture, and woe are we if we decide to try and pretend that we have the full story, or we try to make super definitive statements when the case is, this is a summary of what was told him. Anyway, that's important. I should actually pause and write that down so that I make that point on Sunday morning. And with that written down, let's dive into the actual summary itself. Daniel sees this dream. He sees a vision, dream. Personally, I don't really care. I know that there's technically a difference, but I'm going to use the terms interchangeably. You can't stop me. If it irritates you, then tough, right? You be more accurate whenever you're teaching. Daniel sees this dream thing, and you have 4 great beasts who are coming out of the water. The winds of heaven are stirring the great sea, verse 2, and then 4 beasts are arising from the sea, verse 3. Number 1, when you go to Revelation, there is a picture, I think it's in Revelation like 13 or 14, of a great beast that comes out of the sea and causes trouble. That's because it's playing off of things from the book of Daniel. There's a reason. Sea is usually this picture of chaos, especially in the ancient world. Even now today, like, we've mapped so little of the sea. We don't know what's in the sea. The sea is terrifying. Stay away from the sea. I'm not a sea kind of guy. No, thank you. Totally irrelevant, but there you go. Now you know. the sea is very dangerous, right? It's a very unpredictable place. It's a very confusing place. And in the ancient world, it was a stand-in for a lot of chaos. When you think of something that is chaotic, uncharted, untamable, unchangeable, it's the sea, right? We can cut down a forest. We can burn it down. We can rip the stumps from the ground and make sure stuff doesn't grow there. You can't do that with the water. You can't. And so there is a much greater power that is found in the sea. You see this all the way back in Genesis chapter 1, when God goes to create the earth. When he surveys the earth, the Spirit of God is described as hovering over the waters. We're told that there is no earth, but the earth is just this big ball of water. It's this big ball of fundamental chaos energy that just kind of exists, that God takes and shapes into something worthwhile. We would understand that nowadays to be just kind of a creation. There was nothing, and then God created from nothing. The old world terminalized that, or that's not the right word, but the old world spoke of that in terms of taking the sea and organizing it and turning it into something that is orderly and structured. When God takes the water the second day, it says he establishes boundaries for it. He put water above the atmosphere, and he put water below, which is on the earth. And then on the third day, when he makes dry land, he takes the waters and makes sure that there are places the waters can't go. When God talks to Job, I believe it's Job, later on in the chapters, he says, "Who put the limits on the sea? Like, were you there when I told the sea where it can and can't go? When I told the sea, you can come here but go no further," right? God has control of the fundamentally chaotic parts of this world. That's pretty cool. Out of the chaos of the world arises four beasts representing four kings or four kingdoms as you go throughout. A lion turned human is the first one. A bear who is actively devouring is the second one. A leopard who is very fast is the third one, is kind of the best way to describe that. And the fourth beast doesn't even get a comparison. He's just a beast. He is a monster thing, indescribable, incomprehensible, incomparable to these other creatures. I mean, a lion with wings, lions don't have wings, right? We understand that, but the first beast looked like a lion, and then he had wings, and so you can describe that. By the time you get to the fourth beast, there is no comparison. It's just verse 7, it's dreadful and terrible and very strong. Does it look like a lion? Not enough. Does it look like a dragon? Not enough. Does it look like a goat? Not enough, right? There's no way to actually describe what this thing looks like. He doesn't understand what it looks like. It's just a horrific looking monster thing. Anyone who tries to make artwork of Daniel chapter 7, unfortunate, very difficult. The main point here is there are contrasts being established with God's clarity and God's goodness. When God arrives in verse 9 and 10, you can tell these things about him. And in previous chapters, we've learned a lot about God. We've learned who he is. We've learned what he's like. We've learned how he acts. We've learned how he thinks. We've learned all these different things that he's done. We've seen evidence of who God is and how that works. But when you get to chapter 7, when you start looking at the world and the chaos that is part of this world, you look at the kingdoms that arise, and you can tell some things about some of them, but ultimately it just kind of unravels, and you don't really get everything that's happening. What do you want to put your trust in? The God of Daniel 6, who can step in and help his servant against all odds and against all possibility? Or do you want to rely on the monster beast who you can't define, and all you know is it kills stuff, and it's not very friendly? Right? Where do you want to put your hope? Where do you want to ground yourself in history? What part of this is something where you say, "Oh yes, that's comforting. Let me rely on that really quick." Beware of putting your hope on in the things on the earth. This vision, in many ways, parallels chapter 2. If you go back to chapter 2, there is a statue representative of all these different kingdoms. Nebuchadnezzar is told in chapter 2 in verse something, I forget what it is, like 39 or 40, something around there. Nebuchadnezzar is told that he is the King of Kings to whom God has given the glory in the kingdom, etc., etc. That's 37. And then you get a couple verses later, you're the head of gold, the head of the statue. That statue is representative of a man. Nebuchadnezzar himself is the head of gold. But after Nebuchadnezzar, another kingdom will arise. Well, that's not true. It's technically after Babylon that another kingdom arises. But again, much like chapter 7 is playing with the king versus kingdom for these individual beasts, so too is chapter 2 playing with the king versus kingdom for the individual parts of the statue. The parts of the statue are the gold head, the silver chest and arms, the belly and thighs of bronze, the legs of iron, and the feet of iron and clay. So those two are inextricably tied together. You have 4 different pieces of the human kingdom that are ultimately crushed when God's kingdom comes into the picture. In chapter 7, you have a lion, you have a bear, you have a leopard, you have a monster, you have a second degree of the monster when the one horn comes out. You have the 10-horned monster beast, and then you have the one horn that comes after that gets rid of 3 of the horns and is very confusing. And so again, you have those 4 distinct elements that are all removed or otherwise taken care of when God's kingdom really comes in. You see some similarities between these two, and so as much as you can understand you can understand some of the picture of Daniel chapter 2, that helps to inform the picture of Daniel chapter 7. At least if you believe that it does. I think it does. It's pretty clearly very, very similar. And even in the structure of the book, chapters 2 and 7 really being the mirrors to each other, or the bookends to the actual section of the book that we're in. If you were to dive into the original language, the first chapter is written in Hebrew. The first 2.5 verses of the second chapter are written in Hebrew, but fundamentally, the second chapter is written in Aramaic. In chapter 2, I think it's in verse 3, that the advisors respond to Nebuchadnezzar in Aramaic. And from that point to the very end of chapter 7, the book is written in Aramaic. It's in a different language. That is meant to be a very clear section together. And so it would make sense that chapter 2, the first chapter of the section, and chapter 7, the second chapter, or the last chapter of the section, it would make sense that those mirror each other before chapter 8 goes back into the Hebrew and goes through and covers the rest of the book just in Hebrew. There's a lot that goes into why that distinction is there, and I could explore some of it, but let's just get through Daniel 7. There's going to be enough here anyway. You get these pictures, parallels between the two. So you know that the golden picture is, the golden head is Nebuchadnezzar, is what you know from chapter 2. And if you parallel that, that would be the lion here, which actually makes the most sense. When you look at the lion, his distinguishing characteristics are he had wings, so he was very capable. Then he gets his wings ripped away, so he has his capability removed. Then he stands up like a man, and he's given a man's mind. And so you kind of think about that. Go back to Daniel chapter 4, and what happens. Nebuchadnezzar's walking along on his palace roof. Look at this great Babylon, which I have built by my power and for my glory, etc., etc. And God says, no, you haven't. He humbles Nebuchadnezzar. He strips the wings off Nebuchadnezzar. But eventually, through that, Nebuchadnezzar learns to look to heaven. He humbles himself, and the phrase near the end of chapter 4 is, my mind was returned to me, which means he has been given the mind of a man. He goes from being a beast physically to turning back into a human being. You have some similarities there. Match it with Daniel 2, match it with Daniel 4. Arguably, you could say this first beast is Babylon. Right? If the first beast is Babylon, then the second one's probably Medo-Persia. That would be the bear. The third one's probably Greece. That would be the leopard. And those two will very much align with the ones in chapter 8. But again, that's a whole different conversation. The monster beast then would presumably be Rome. And that's kind of why I come to that conclusion, that I think it's probably Rome. The important part of the chapter, none of those things are mentioned. Because it doesn't matter who's which kingdom. It matters, the important thing here is what God is actually doing. What do you learn about when you look at the lion, when you look at the bear, when you look at the leopard? What do you learn? Well, you learn three things. What does God do to the kingdoms of the world? God disciplines them. The lion has its wings ripped off. The lion is fundamentally changed. He walks upright like a man. He is given the mind of a man. God disciplines the kingdoms of the earth. He's in charge of them. He directs them, right? He can control what they do. Second one, God directs them. When the second beast, they're all beasts. The second beast comes up. He's like a bear in verse 5. He's looking to eat something, and then what happens? There's a command that says, arise and devour much meat. Right? Go here, do this. And the beast does. God can direct the monsters, the nations of this world. God directs them to do his will. And the third one is God can determine what happens to these monsters. The leopard is defined in verse 6 as having 4 wings, which is very odd, 4 heads, which is also very odd until you think about how Greece ended up working out, and some of the details from chapter 8, but again, we'll come back to it retrospectively next week when we get to chapter 8. He has these 4 wings, he has these 4 heads. What in the world is happening to this? You see the line at the very end of verse 6, which is dominion was given to it. God can determine who's in charge. God gets to set who's actually ruler. And ultimately, what you see in the monster beast is that God destroys those who go outside of his prerogative. The fourth beast does not adhere to God. The fourth beast actively rebels against God. The fourth beast speaks against God. It has haughty eyes against God. And so instead of sparing them, or sparing that fourth beast, God just ultimately executes it. By the time you get to verse 11, Daniel keeps looking until God just kills the beast, and its body was destroyed, and it's given to the burning fire. The rest of the beasts have their dominion taken away, but are allowed to live for a little bit longer. God, has control of all of them. Those who directly defy him are cut off instantly, and those who don't are granted a little extension of life. Even though, right, the important thing is not Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, or whatever combination you want to say it is. God doesn't care about that. He never specifies it, right? That's not the important thing. That's not what... If you're coming to Daniel 7 and you're trying to nail down what each of the beasts are, you fundamentally miss the point of the chapter. Because if the chapter was about Babylon, Rome, etc., we would have gotten the names. We get the names in chapter 8. That's what chapter 8's about, right? We get names. We understand that. That's what chapter 2's about, to some extent. We get a name. Like, you, Nebuchadnezzar, you are the head of gold. We get that confirmed when it's important. It's not important for chapter 7. Because the picture of chapter 7 is, throughout this life, even though the monsters will rise up, they will rise up. The kingdoms of this earth are monsters. Sometimes we can see and comprehend them and compare them to other things. Sometimes they're completely incomprehensible. But whenever the kingdoms of the world rear their ugly heads, God is still in control. That's the point of chapter 7. That's the fundamental point of chapter 2. You also have, a picture of some other, specific identification of some things that are going on in chapter 2, sure. But that's the fundamental point of chapter 7. And don't distract from that. Don't lose that just because you're trying to nail down who, what, where, when in super specific and hyper specific detail. The point here is the same point as chapter 4, that the Most High rules in the realms of mankind, and the realm of mankind, and he gives it to whomever he pleases. The point is that life is rough, life is chaotic, it will be bad, and it will keep on producing bad things. It will be irredeemably evil, and there's nothing you can do about a lot of it. But that's not all there is. And it's not just terrible, and you need to start being able to see that God can work behind the scenes. Back to the resolution of chapter 3, or back to the resolution of last week of chapter 6. God has the ability to solve the problem. We don't know if he will. We don't understand exactly what he's doing, but we do know that he's in charge. So, even as you live through the realm of history, take heart in the fact that God has already overcome the world. The world will look horrible, the world will look terrible, and in many ways the world will be horrible and terrible. But God's in control, so it's all going to be okay. Don't you just feel better about that? A lot of people don't, right? A lot of people get caught in verse 7 and verse 8. There is a monster beast. And even Daniel gets caught to some extent in this. We'll see that later on, and I'll talk about some of it then. You see the iron teeth. You see the extremely strong beast. You see him destroying things. You see the horns, and you have all of these questions. But Daniel really wants us to get the point, and really God wants us to get the point. The second point that's made in this three-part survey, we've looked at a bit of the history, but you need to remember what's going on in heaven in verse 9. It's very refreshing, and as you're reading this chapter, there's a tendency to panic and to get some kind of anxiety build up, right? You're seeing this vision, this dream. You don't understand exactly what's happening. A beast crawls out of the water, and it looks terrible. And then a second, and a third, and a fourth. And you start to worry, and you start to stress. And all these horrible things are building up. And then you hit verse 9, and it's just really nice. Right? In my Bible, you can see it there. Once you hit verse 9, the prose goes away and it starts to be a poetic kind of script. You can probably see that in your own Bible if you have that on you, which you should. Hopefully you're reading this yourself and it's not just me reading it for you. When the poetry kicks in, and even just the phrasing of it, right? There's this mouth uttering great boasts. There are these human eyes. It's possessing eyes like the human eyes. The mouth that's uttering these great boasts against God. And I kept looking. And then there were thrones. And then it's all okay. And there's this moment of silence where God steps in. He's called here the Ancient of Days. But the point is, hey, forget the chaos. It's okay, right? Come back to reality, which is the physical reality is these horrible things happening on earth. But the true reality and the more important reality is the spiritual reality. That even though there is chaos on earth, God's in heaven and all's right with the world, right? God will fix it. And that's the ultimate solution. The evil that exists, that we are so worried about, and rightfully so worried about, the evil that exists is cut off because God comes into play. The Ancient of Days, as he is called, which just means the old guy, right? The oldest of guys, the oldest one that exists. He arrives and the courtroom is set up. There are thrones that are set down for the Ancient of Days to take his seat, and then the court around him to take their seats in the end of verse 10. All of this courtroom is coming together, the divine courtroom, and it's coming for one purpose: judgment on all the nations of the earth. Judgment is rendered on all three creatures, or on all four creatures. To the three that God interacted with, to the three that accepted God's correction or direction or his dominion that he gave to them for a little while. To those three, he takes their power away from them, but he lets them live. To the monster who was just defiant and no scrap of good was found in him, fine. That monster is just killed. There's no use for it. He's killed and he's disposed of completely. The judgment is rendered. The power is taken from the earthly kingdoms, and notice who it's given to. It's handed over to one called the Son of Man, which is a special title, Son of Man. I did a whole research paper on this in college, and I bring that up because it's the only time to talk about how I did a whole research paper on it in college. But every single time we talk about Daniel 7, I have to bring it up because it makes me sound like I know what I'm talking about. The Son of Man just means a human being, right? It's kind of confusing. There's this human being who's coming, and this human being is receiving authority. Of course, he's coming with the clouds of heaven in verse 13, which human beings can't come with the clouds of heaven. Actually, that is restricted, and that is only accessible by God. And so you have this weird picture of one who at least looks like a human being, right? Just like the beasts were kind of looking like a lion or a bear or a leopard or whatever, right? Just like the beasts were kind of looking like that. It wasn't exactly, but kind of looking like that. so too is this one coming who kind of looks like a human being. It's not exactly, there's some difference there. It's kind of a human being. I wonder what's going on. And this human being coming down like God, it looks like he's half human and half God, and I can't really distinguish between the two. Interesting, isn't it? And he comes in, and what does he do? He goes before the Ancient of Days, so God, who's seated on the throne, and God gives him dominion and honor and a kingdom so that everyone would serve him. In verse 14, you see the language that all peoples, nations, and populations of all languages might serve him. It's kind of a riff on the writings that Nebuchadnezzar and Darius have made at this point. When you see in chapter 2, 3, 4, and 6, Darius's response, for instance, when he sees Daniel come out of the lion's den, and Daniel's perfectly okay. In Daniel chapter 6, verse 26, tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. He is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom is one which will not be destroyed. His dominion will be forever. He rescues, saves, and performs signs and miracles in heaven and on earth, who has also rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. Actually, it's in verse 25. Darius the king wrote to who? He wrote to all the peoples, nations, and populations of all languages who were living in the land. All those things. And so the language in verse 14, chapter 7, verse 14, is this Son of Man guy, God hybrid thing, question mark. He was given dominion and honor and a kingdom, just like Darius is talking about, just like Nebuchadnezzar's been talking about, so that all peoples, nations, and populations of all languages, just like Darius speaks to, or just like Nebuchadnezzar speaks to, God is riffing he's taking the Babylonian standard of how to communicate with people and make public pronouncements, and he's using that for his own announcement, which is really cool. God communicates with people using the standard of their time to communicate things that they would understand so that they would understand them. There's a reason a lot of times when you are, preaching and teaching, you can take modern examples and use those because it helps people to understand what they're actually being told. You have this one like the Son of Man. He looks like God. He looks like man. I don't know which one he is. Keep that in mind for the New Testament era. His dominion, it becomes God's dominion, or rather he goes up to God and is given this eternal dominion, which means he'll be eternal in dominion, right? His kingdom won't pass away, so he'll be in charge of the kingdom forever. I wonder who this is, right? There's a reason in the New Testament Jesus goes by the title Son of Man, because he looks just like a human being, like this guy in Daniel 7. But he's not just like a human being. And you can tell even by the end of Matthew, right? He has gone to God, and what does he say at the end of Matthew? All authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth, right? And I am with you always, even until the end of the age. What you have is the kingdom that has been established. It is eternal, and Jesus is with us. What you have is this picture of Jesus in the Old Testament. But again, Daniel doesn't say there's this guy named Jesus who's going to be a God-human hybrid who comes down at some point and receives a kingdom. Those are all things that you can read into it. That's not really the point of Daniel 7. The point of Daniel 7 is God's in control. He's got it. And his kingdom is the important one. Don't miss the point that God wins. It looks for the moment like all hope is lost, but don't miss that God wins, because that's the real important part. All of that is to say, you have this picture, right? If you tie it to, if you start thinking about this too literally, then here's what you would end up thinking, right? Babylon existed, but was replaced. Medo-Persia existed, but was replaced. Greece existed, but was replaced. Rome existed, and God destroyed it. And when God destroyed Rome, then he sent Jesus, and Jesus received all authority after God destroyed Rome, which it screws up the timeline incredibly, right? That's not exactly how that happened. Jesus came during the reign of the Roman Empire, and he changed things inside the Roman Empire. He didn't wait until the Roman Empire was destroyed and then establish his kingdom, and that was the last one. In many ways, this monster beast is not merely Rome, or not merely wrapped up in the identity of any particular nation. but it is a picture of the wrath and the power of mankind, and how God can take that power, destroy it, and do something else instead. God has established his kingdom. But nothing about this says that it will be easy. In Daniel's day, it's not going to be easy. He has to live through the physical manifestations of these four beasts. But in our day, it's not easy either. Right? These four beasts, their literal interpretations may have passed away. But there's a reason God doesn't tie this down to just those four nations. Because we're still living in a world that is ruled by the chaos. We're still living in a world where the government just rises up and does whatever it wants to. And in many cases, it can be just as horrible as the monster beast is. The point is not, hey, God destroyed Rome one time. The point is, whatever opposition comes up against God, God can wipe that out and remove it. Keep that in mind. God can destroy these evil things. And it's okay to have confidence in the Lord. It's not going to be easy. So be confident, because God will show you to the victory. And that's what the last half of the chapter is about. Verses 15 through 28, pointing out how we get there, right? You have history, the literal history, verses 1 through 8. You have verses 9 through 14, which is the view from heaven and all these good things that are happening, and how the saints will ultimately rule, and they'll be part of the kingdom, and everybody will be taken care of. You have all those beautiful pictures. And then you have verse 15, which is Daniel doesn't understand. And so he goes to one of the angels nearby, presumably, and he starts asking for an explanation. What in the world is happening here? And here's the explanation in verse 17 and 18. You want the real interpretation of this chapter? You want to know Babylon, Medo, Persia, Greece, Rome, or whatever combination, or whenever this is going to happen? You want to know the identity of Jesus? Here you go. Here's the angel's chance to show you all these things. Here's the interpretation. Verse 17. The great beasts which are four in number are four kings which will arise from the earth, but the saints of the highest one will receive the kingdom and take possession of the kingdom forever. That's it. That's the point. The point is not, here are these specific nations and God's going to destroy them in these particular years and you need to know all these things. The point of this chapter is, there are kingdoms on earth, there are kings on earth, they're not going to be good. God's got you, and it's okay. And the saints ultimately win in the end. That's the real important thing. Well, I want to know about the identity of the fourth beast, verse 19. I want to know the exact meaning of the fourth beast. It was different. It was dreadful, like all these other things. I'm trying to see what exactly is happening. And the answer is, Verse 23, it's a fourth kingdom. It's different. It destroys a lot of things. It's got some kings. It's got some kingly trouble, and you know what? God destroys it, ultimately. Now, it's not going to be an easy fight. As you go through, you can see quite a few things about it. Verse 21, the horn is waging war against the saints. We get overpowered. In the meantime, while we're waiting for God's intervention, we may get overpowered. That's not wonderful. There's going to be a war that is waged, and he was prevailing against them. There is destruction for the saints. There's a lot of difficulty on this world. In verse 23, we get to see there is a complete destruction. This is a fourth kingdom different from all the other kingdoms. It devours the whole earth and tramples it down and crushes it. Right? Again, not necessarily literal, but it is talking about a wholesale kind of destruction. Evil gets to run rampant and do whatever it is it wants to do. There's chaos. There's a big fight that's happening. You'll see that there are civil wars in verse 24. One of the kings, there are 10 horns for 10 kings, and then there's another one, the little horn, that will rise up and throw down 3 of them, right? The system will fight against itself, and it will leave chaos, and nothing good looks like it's going to be happening. In verse 25, this little horn specifically, one of the kings, he will speak against the Most High. He'll wear down the saints of the highest one. There's an endurance testing period. Like, none of this is good. None of this is pleasant. He is going to wear out the saints as much as he can. He will speak against the Most High, so disrespect against God. He will wear down the saints, so fighting against God's people. He will intend to make alterations in the times and in the law. Right? He'll try to set himself up as the ultimate authority. He'll intend to. He never actually makes it happen. and they will be handed over to him. The people, I assume, the saints that is, they'll be handed over to him for a while. A time and times and half a time. Most people insist, that's 3.5, which is half of 7. I don't know, maybe. Right? Go with that. It means it's not a complete destruction. That's the important thing. It may be destructive, but it's not forever. It may be rough, but it's not going to... He doesn't ultimately win. That's the point. Right? All these terrible things will happen. And be prepared for all these terrible things to happen. But just know that he won't ultimately win. Verses 26 and 27, eventually the court will convene. His dominion will be taken away, annihilated and destroyed forever. Eventually, there's a destruction. Eventually, there's a removal. There is a victory and a release of God's people. Because his saints are going to be taken care of. God triumphs, and the saints are delivered after a while. And so you're looking around, you look around at you right now. There's chaos in this world. Nobody's pretending there's not. Nobody's going to say that this world is very peaceful, especially right now, right? Tons of stuff going on, Everybody has his own thought on it. Everybody is publishing his own opinion online, which is ultimately just destructive and disunifying. It's not helping anybody. Total, just a lack of orderliness and care and goodness in the world, it seems. It's always been that way, right? Don't be surprised when the monsters rise up and when they try to take away peace from the saints and distract everyone with the chaos that's in this world. The point for the saints is that we should not dwell on the chaos. Because as much as there is momentary and light affliction, as much as there is a lot of problem around us, there's peace that's coming. And we know who the real king is. And whatever governmental entities are making whatever decisions that you do or do not approve of, we know that peace exists. We know that God exists. And we know that he's the one who's really in charge. So don't be so caught up in the world. Don't be so caught up in everything around you when you could instead look into the heavens and see the peace that reigns there. Whatever's going on in the world today, the throne still exists and the Ancient of Days has still taken his seat, and he is ready to pass judgment on whoever it is that you like and whoever it is you don't like. So just put your hope in that instead of putting your hope in the things of the world going so well. Too many people, especially too many Christians, get caught in this idea we can't always see what God is doing. We want to nail down specifics of what God is doing. We want to know which kingdom is what. We want to know what every single detail means. God does not intend us to figure out every single last thing. I'm okay to say I don't understand it, right? I don't understand the ways of this world. But I do understand that God calls evil to account. And the real question is not, is God acting according to my timeline, or what exactly is God doing, or how do I see God doing all these things? The real question is, am I living to God's standard? Because I know that's what's coming to judge me. The earthly kingdoms aren't ultimately that important. So quit looking at them and start looking to the Ancient of Days and the Son of Man. Those are the important things. Again, there's a whole lot you can debate. There's a whole lot you can try and specify. And there's a whole lot of evidence that people do bring up as to why each beast stands for each particular nation, or which beast stands for which one, or whatever it is. People will argue whatever they want to argue. That's not the point of Daniel 7. So stop getting caught by looking at all the little insignificant things. Look at the realistic, look at the picture. This is what God wants you to learn. He's in charge, and don't try and tell him otherwise. All right, that's all we have for today. Hopefully that's helpful. There's something of benefit to you, and on Friday I'll be posting the Sunday evening sermon, which is the next step in the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew chapter 5, verses 11 through 20 is the section that we're going to cover in detail. I'll see you then.